need to look up something before I can really discuss it, but it looks interesting. I'm having to look up the Henderson scale of plot derailment with regards to tabletop role-playing games.
Oh, okay.
It goes all the way to -9.
This sounds like a tabletop thing, doesn't
and
it?
then up to a full Henderson. But it also has I guess this is like the thermodynamic rationalization for below -0. It goes above 1 Henderson to 2 Hendersons. Is anyone familiar with this?
No. Please fill me in.
Okay. Apparently -9 Henderson. The Henderson scale of plot derailment in the link is a handy scale used to determine just how much action has derailed the plot of an RPG. The actions are almost either caused by that guy or this guy. Very rarely it's a noble last action by a supremely selfless neckbeard to stop a disaster before it starts. This is just me reading from the wiki.
Alrighty.
So at -9 Hendersons, the action undertaken has solved every problem in the game's universe for every living and non-living thing in existence. Up to the full Henderson, which the action undertaken has effectively caused total plot derailment. So, who here has run a game?
Not for a very long time.
Do we have any stories that we can share? Like when you sit down after running a game and realize that, oh, they did it, right? Like, Julie, I remember you telling us about our friend Chris having a binder ready with the port city. Can you tell that story?
Well, it was
landmarking?
actually the. Oh yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. Now I'm remembering. Yeah, so my friend Chris is a longtime DM, and he'd had this. I wasn't playing in this game, but he's told me this story. He sent his players to this fantastic port city, and he had so many. It was a bustling port city, so it was full of people and different NPCs from all different walks of life, and it was just jam packed with plot threads and seed quests, and he had so many potential paths that he could lead his players on from this fantastic port city. And as soon as his players reached this fabulous paradise, the first thing they did was look to commission a boat out of it, because it was a port city.
Right, because that's what you do in a port city.
Yeah.
You're like, well, it's time to get the hell out of here.
Yeah, so I just remember Chris doing this action where he's like, oh, okay. You arrive in a port city.
Very strong.
Yeah.
This is the same DM who ported us in our game to an alternate dimension where our hardcore fantasy characters had to be made to realize that we were in a combination of Pizza Hut and Taco Bell.
Right.
Oh God.
Yeah, that was a morning.
I had a DM put me. We played a game of Paranoia.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were playing it, he was talking about, okay, so you've been issued some equipment, you've been finding equipment that are like in these boxes. As you're moving between room to room, you're finding this equipment. And in one equipment, you're finding an explosive device, which you will probably need at some point. So everyone's opting to pick it up, right? Which is real stupid, but here we go. And so somebody manages to have the explosive devices. We keep moving through the rooms, and he's like, okay, so you found one. You open the box and it's like, okay, so can I take this out? Like, is it the right color? He's like, yeah, it is. And so you grab it and it's like, what am I holding? And he's like, it's a stick, like a straight stick, except that the straight stick's been bent. And it's like, oh. And he's like, yeah. So everything's all well and good. It's like, what do I do with it? And it's like, well, I mean, you've got to figure that out. I'm like, okay, cool. And we keep moving along. And he's like, okay, you come into this other room and you can tell there's something wrong. I'm going to need to issue you a map, obviously, to work with this. We're about an hour into the game by this point. And he puts a map on the table. And it's a map from Link to the Past. And he's been having us play a Zelda adventure the entire time, issuing us equipment.
Wow.
So I had a boomerang, somebody else had the actual bomb, and we're like, okay, we can use this to get through all these levels then. And we ended up doing that. We ended up just playing a round of Zelda until we were done.
That's amazing.
That's excellent.
I mean, my story as a GM is the time that I was running Aberrant, which, if you're not familiar with Aberrant, is a White Wolf game, but it's a superhero game. And the idea is that they came up with their own universe, and it started with the 1920s era game was called Adventure, and then it had Aberrant, which was like the superhero game, and then it had one called Aeon, which was set after the superheroes try to kill everyone and get driven off Earth, and Aeon was, the Scions who arose afterwards, and it was a science fiction setting. And Aberrant was just really great because, like, the rationale for there being superheroes was that humans spontaneously develop this mutation called a node in their brain, and if you have some kind of traumatic experience, you can develop superpowers as a result of it, which resulted in a lot of people trying to, like, skydive without parachutes to try to activate their things. But one of my players, there was a big bad thing that the players did, and they all had to run and scatter. And one of my players decided, as everyone else is trying to get back together and get the team back together to combat the bad guys, because they had a bad, but they were going to come back and do it, that he was going to go off to Manitoba and work on a farm.
In game.
In game.
Yes. Okay. Cool. All right.
Yeah, and
Just retire?
No, he expected them to find him. Which, is possible because he's a Nova, right?
Oh.
And Novas are, if nothing else, they're easily recognizable because they're noticeably stronger, faster, better looking than normal humans. Also, they have to eat thousands upon thousands of calories a day. But the problem is that he had two traits that made that impossible. Because he could shut down his node, he could power it down and look like a normal person, and he had a trait called cipher, which meant that he had no electronic paper trail, right? He had no legal paper trail. He had a really high cipher score. So he had no ID, right? He had never had a Facebook, right? So nobody
Okay.
recognized him, and he was gone.
Yeah.
He just disappeared. It was like in Indiana Jones where he's trying to describe what Marcus is going to do, right? And he's like, he speaks 7 languages. He knows people from here to Alexandria. He's going to blend in, disappear. With any luck, he's got the Grail already, and he just smash cut to Marcus, being like, does anyone here speak ancient Greek? But only if that worked.
So I was running for my first game as a DM, which was earlier this year, because I wanted to do a 5th edition game, but I didn't want to run a pre-made, but at the same time I didn't want to like commit too hard. It was supposed to be just a single shot, and I didn't want to like go create a bunch of stuff. So I decided I was going to do the Haunted Mansion for Disneyland as a D&D one-off story. And a couple of like miscalculations I made were I could have sworn all my players were like fairly intimately familiar with the Haunted Mansion, and none of them essentially were, which actually worked out fine. But essentially, we got to the point of like the big kind of cinematic thing was the grand ballroom with all the dancing ghosts and all that stuff. And like a lot of the lore, I tied into the murderous bride, right? And she's the big bad for this. And the ghosts are trying to like essentially get the party to evict her from the mansion. And so they're getting all these clues, and they're in the bedroom of one of the dead husbands that the bride's murdered, and they decide to punch their way through the roof into the attic. And therefore completely bypass the ballroom, so we never saw the ballroom, and never essentially got the plea from the ghost to like really say. I mean, obviously the bride attacks them. They know it's bad, but yeah, they never got any of that backstory essentially on like why the bride should go away. So yeah, that was fun.